The sun is shining today in Helsinki and we are sitting here at NIB's headquarters. Here with me I have the new NIB President and CEO André Küüsvek. Welcome to NIB.
It's a pleasure to be here.
After your first weeks, what are your first impressions of the bank?
Very positive. Most of my expectations have been met. NIB is exactly the same strong, financially strong institution that I knew it from outside, and anchored by two pillars of its mandate, that is the productivity and the environment.
You have a very long experience in international finance. Could you give a short resume? Who is André Küüsvek?
I come from Estonia, which of course is one of the member countries of NIB, and my studies coincided with the period of opening up. So I was lucky to be selected and to be given opportunities to study in 6 different universities in 5 different countries, either part-time studies or writing my thesis. And my first degree actually is in construction engineering. But by the time I got that degree and I wrote my thesis in Germany at the time, then returning to Estonia, of course the system had changed. The old system collapsed and the new market economy was there, but it was of course in the very embryonic stage. So it was obvious to us that nobody's going to build anything big anytime soon. And that's how I became a banker. We were one of the very first bankers in the country. Which of course was a very steep learning curve. From there I moved on to Germany and Hamburg first, and then Frankfurt, working for banks in those cities and leading German banks. I then moved to EBRD and spent 25 years with EBRD, very rewarding years. I was lucky enough again to have many different moves, cross-border moves, and work in different countries in the head office in London, but also leading as the country manager the bank in Kazakhstan and Ukraine. I was then for 7 years leading the capital market development function, which is one of the most global jobs you can think of in an IFI, before becoming a managing director and having a regional responsibility for Central Asia for my final year with EBRD.
25 years at the EBRD, that's a long time. That's a lot of experience and long career in international financial institution. How do you see the value added and the role of the IFIs in today's world?
I would see the IFIs as a pillar of stability, really. And pillar of stability in the sense that the IFIs can always afford to take a longer term view compared to commercial banks. And as we know, commercial banks are very much driven by short-term profits, and in many of the markets the annual scorecard defines your annual bonus, which is the big driver for some of these banks. Now IFIs can take a much longer term view. They can see their business going through the different economic cycles, the ups and downs. And even the IFIs are owned by governments. I would say that being owned by several member countries gives you a significant advantage versus being just a single country development bank or a financing institution. And because in single countries these institutions are always going to be politically influenced, whilst again the IFIs can take beyond those political cycles a view, remain true to their mandate and support the clients over the long run, whatever the economic cycle.
IFIs have also been very active now in the corona crisis, and this crisis and corona is still affecting the operating environment in the Nordic and the Baltic countries. How do you see the path to recovery?
This would require a crystal ball, which of course I wouldn't have. But maybe taking a step back, I would say that the corona crisis comes after a decade of difficult economic conditions for banks. Talking about the negative interest rates, the pressure on margins, this continued monetary and fiscal stimulus that is being injected. Now, corona crisis would have had a very different effect, of course, without those measures and without the ability of of central banks and governments to come and support. However, I would still hope that the negative interest will not be there forever. They will turn. Whether or not the 2021 is the year out of the corona crisis, I would remain maybe somewhat conservative here. We are soon approaching half year term, and we see still restrictions in place. The vaccination has been slower than we would like, so I would not put too many hopes on recovery this year. Next year it's going to be different. When we come out of the crisis, I don't think we come to the same point where we were entering the crisis. So certain things have changed. We have learned a few new tricks, like working also remotely and so on. Some of the sectors will remain affected for a longer period of time. But I think NIB, like other IFIs, has a role to play here again, as the bank did in 2020. I think there is more to do to alleviate the effects of the corona crisis, and there is more to do also to help the clients in the post-corona recovery phase.
You have just started here, and no one is expecting you to announce a new strategy for NIB now. But what are your plans for the first few weeks, and maybe how do you see NIB's role in the future?
My focus here, when I stepped through the door into NIB, were that I want to deal with 3 C's. The first C is the colleagues, the second C is the clients, and the third C is the countries. And this process is ongoing. There is still a lot more to learn before we start to maybe introduce some of the changes. And when the changes come, they're not going to be revolutionary. If anything, they're going to be evolutionary. I think partially also coming from the external environment. But what I would say is that today, when our capital position is strong and our profitability is still reasonably strong, we would, I think, have the ability to move to a slightly riskier bracket of financing with a portfolio, which of course means we will retain both the lower risk as well as the higher risk assets. We will also, of course, have 8 member countries where the risks by definition differ. But I would think that we can move maybe more towards medium-sized clients away from the very large corporates, and also maybe to do a little bit more lending at some point in the neighboring countries outside the member country region. That portion in the past was much larger, about 20%. Today it's actually below 5%. I think particularly the second pillar of our mandate, which is the sustainability, is something where we could have a positive role to play in the environmental projects, energy efficiency, creating a green economy. And then finally, I would say that we should probably also look how can we do things together with other market players, be it the commercial banks where we can maybe come in as a parallel lender, or with other IFIs that have similar mandates to ours.
The sun is shining outside. Do you have any short-term plans for the weekend in Helsinki?
I am a person that likes to be much out in the fresh air, and I actually say that it's symbolic that I'm moving to Helsinki at a time when we have the spring and the world is kind of opening up from the darker and deeper winter. And over the weekend, I'm planning to do some cycling. I'm planning to do some walking. Of course, every Estonian should know Helsinki by heart, but I have to say I have some catch up to do. I've been living out in Europe and Asia for too long, but it's great to be here. It's home away from home.
Thank you very much for the interview, André.
Thank you, Jukka.